Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. So in today's video, what I thought I would do is share with you 3 retirement withdrawal strategies that don't require you to come up with a safe withdrawal rate. You've probably heard of the 4% rule. It was something that was developed by Bill Bingen, who was a CFP back in 1994. He's actually coming out with a new book in a couple of months where I think he says the safe withdrawal rate is 5% now. But that raises all kinds of questions. Is that really the safe withdrawal rate? It worked in the past. Will it work in the future? We have all of these questions around what a safe withdrawal rate is, but it turns out there are some really good withdrawal strategies that don't require us to think about, calculate, or use a safe withdrawal rate. So I'm going to show you 3 of them today. Everything I show you, I will link to below the video. I think each of these is reasonable. You might actually choose to follow one, or you might just sort of use it as a sanity check to say, okay, this is how much I'm taking out this year. Does that make sense? Or am I taking out significantly more than what some of these spending strategies would suggest I could take out? So that's what we're going to do. Let's dive right in. The first one comes from our good friends at the Bogleheads Forum. It's called the variable percentage withdrawal. And it's very easy. All of these, by the way, I think are pretty easy to use. I'll show you a couple of things about this, but at the heart of this strategy is the table right here. And one of the things I like about this table is you'll notice it's based on your age. So hopefully, sometimes I forget my age, but even when I'm wrong, I'm usually close. So hopefully you know your age. And of course, you'll know what your retirement savings balances are. And that would be across all your accounts that you're using for, your retirement, not just IRAs and 401ks. You may have a taxable account, for example. And then what you do is you find your age, and then they give you some stock bond allocations here. Now there's some more beyond what you see here. I'll show you in a second. But pick the closest to your stock bond allocation, and then find your percentage. And that's the percent of your retirement savings that you could spend, let's say, this year. Now, a couple of things to note. First of all, don't equate these percentages with what we call the 4% rule that Bill Bingen gave us. They are really night and day different. And the reason is this. As you probably know, if you follow Bill Bingen's approach, yes, you use an initial safe withdrawal rate in your first year of retirement to get the ball rolling. But starting in year 2, you completely ignore that percent. If you start with 4% in year 1, you then throw that percentage rate out. You don't use any percents ever again. It's just in year 1. What you do beginning in year 2 is take whatever the dollar amount was that 4% or whatever safe withdrawal rate you use, whatever dollar amount that generated in year 1, and adjust it for inflation, right? That's the 4% rule. Here, you're not adjusting these for inflation. At 40, you take 4.3% of whatever your portfolio was, say at the beginning of the year or whenever you start this. And the next year, you just take another 4.3%, assuming you've got the same stock bond allocation. So that's an important caveat here. This does not adjust for inflation. Year 2, it's the same percent, but depending on how your investments did, you could be taking out a lot more or a lot less. Now, you might say, okay, but shouldn't we adjust for inflation? How's that going to work? Well, a couple of things to think about. First of all, you probably have some other sources of income, at least Social Security, and that does adjust for inflation. So when you think about your retirement income as a whole, you are getting some inflation adjustments, but just not from this withdrawal strategy. The second thing to think about, and this, I think study after study shows this, is we don't actually spend an inflation-adjusted amount throughout retirement. We tend to spend less as we age. Obviously, we each have to make these decisions on our own, and your situation can be different than my situation. So those are things to think about. The other thing I'll say about this strategy is, for me, I don't think I could bring myself to spend that much of my portfolio if I were retiring at the age of 40. I don't think until I got into my 60s, I could bring myself to spend more than about 3.5% of my portfolio. Again, that's just my comfort level. But the bigger point is, consider these guidelines, right? I mean, you have to decide what's best for you, and it may not be exactly what any of these withdrawal strategies or spending plans suggest. So always filter this through your own sort of view of the world and common sense and your willingness to take some risk. But having said that, very simple, easy method to apply. And again, you don't have to necessarily follow it. Maybe you just use this as a sanity check each year to say, okay, here's how much I'm taking out. What does this show? Am I close? Am I way over budget, so to speak? Now, the other thing I'll mention here is that they offer a really comprehensive spreadsheet. It's right here. Well, you can get it in Google Sheets, Microsoft, but I'll show it to you in Google Sheets. And what I would do if you're going to use this is make a copy of it, because this is view only. So we'll make a copy. And now I can edit it. And I would, if you're going to use this, obviously you'll read the instructions. It's not that hard to follow. It's involved, but so you'll spend a little bit of time with it. But there are plenty of resources here on the Boglehead forum that you can check out. It also includes this page for folks saving for retirement. It gives you an estimate of how much you should be saving each month based on your age, how much your salary and your portfolio balance. It also gives you a potential loss. Now this is just hypothetical, but for example, just to make these numbers a little bigger, let's say your portfolio balance is 500,000. So with a 60-40 stock bond allocation, they're estimating you could lose 150,000. Of course, we all know we could lose more than that, right? And it kind of gives you an idea of what that would do to your monthly income after that hypothetical loss. And of course, if you change the asset allocation, let's go all the way up to 90-10, your hypothetical loss goes up because your portfolio is taking on more risk. In terms of retirement, they give you a nice spreadsheet. Again, you can change all of these numbers. You can factor in Social Security and other pensions. You can even factor in temporary retirement income. Maybe you're going to do some part-time work for the first 5 years of retirement. It also factors in here the potential loss, which again is tied to your stock bond allocation, and what impact that would have on your monthly income. So a pretty neat tool. But the other thing I'll mention, even if you didn't want to dive into those kind of details, is they give you tables. And the stock bond allocation, I think on the website, it stops at 70-30. By the way, it starts at age 18. I don't know. I don't think I've ever met an 18-year-old that retired. But in any event, it goes up to 90-10 as well. So you get a little more detail on the tables. There's a lot more to this spreadsheet. And maybe I'll leave it for another video, but at a high level, I just wanted to show you that it's available. And that's strategy one. I think it's certainly a reasonable strategy. I talked about it probably a couple of years ago. I was probably a little harder on the strategy then than I would be today. I think if there's any sort of thing where I would definitely differ is, if we go back to the spreadsheet, I would not be taking out these kinds of percentages at young ages. I probably wouldn't, as I said, go above about 3.5 until I got into my 60s, but that's just from my comfort level. You may have a different view. All right, so strategy number 2, I actually wrote an article about this some time ago, and I'll link to this article, but it's called the Spend Safely in Retirement Strategy. It's based on a paper that's linked to in this article. Let me show it to you. It's right here, and there was even an update to the paper, but I'll just show you the paper. Again, I'll link to the article, and you can check all this out. It's a very simple strategy. It really just two main components. The first is somewhat similar to the Boglehead strategy we just looked at, but to calculate your spending in any given year, you just use the required minimum distribution formula. And you may say, well, wait a minute, Rob, what if I retire before RMDs kick in? That's okay. You can calculate what your theoretical RMD would be at any age, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So you do that. What's your RMD? And then they recommend for Social Security, if you can, waiting until you're 70. Now, if you're married, it may be that the lower earning spouse might take it earlier than that, but the higher earning spouse, or if you're single, wait till you're 70, which I know is not always practical for everybody. I think what they would say in this plan is if you can't wait till you're 70, wait as long as you can. Obviously, it's going to increase your benefits and provides a lot of what some would call longevity insurance. Insurance against living a a long time. And their point in this plan is, RMDs, just like with the Boglehead approach, they're not indexed to inflation. It's a different percentage each year. And so if your portfolio balance is up, you get more. If it's down, you might get less. But the Social Security is indexed for inflation. And the reality is a lot of folks in the U.S. rely pretty heavily on their Social Security. And so when you combine those two together, you're actually still getting a reasonable amount of inflation protection, but it's not perfect. But very simple to apply. And in my view, in talking to a lot of people, this is actually, some version of this is the strategy that a lot of people follow who might not listen to this channel or other, retirement planning content. They just have it just is kind of easy to follow, right? Because the Social Security check comes in every month, and their broker, whether it's Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard, sends them their RMD checks, once a year or once a quarter or whatever it may be, and that's just what they do, and that's just how they fund their retirement. But again, you can apply this at any age, and you can, of course, calculate the quote, I'll call it quote RMDs across all of your portfolio balances, not just your traditional retirement accounts. Now, I will have a calculator that will make this very easy to calculate your RMD for any age. I'd hope to have it done now, but I'll have it done soon, and when I do, I'll put it in the newsletter I send out every Sunday morning. You can subscribe to that, by the way, below this video. And I'll also come back into this video and add it below, but I had a few issues with it, but I'll have it soon. Having said that, here's the IRS publication. This is the Uniform Life Table that most people will use. This is who should use it. If you're single, unmarried, or if you're married whose spouse is not more than 10 years younger, among others, and there's another category here, but you would use this table 3. It's called the Uniform Lifetime Table. And you just find your age, and that's your distribution period. And so, you just take your portfolio balance, divide it by this factor, and that would be your withdrawal amount. And again, though, it starts at 72. What if you're 65? Well, you can figure out what this distribution period would be for any age. So how do you do it? So remember this right here. This covers married owners, so if you have an IRA and you're married, so long as your spouse is not more than 10 years younger. Because this Uniform Lifetime Table is actually a joint lifetime table between you and this I'll call it a hypothetical spouse who's 10 years younger than you. So what we can do is we can go to this table 2 and find what your factor would be. And so here, these are like percentages, right? So let's say you're 65. So you'd find your age in this column here. So we'll go down till we get to 65. I know it's making my eyes blur over as I scroll down here. I apologize for that. Like I said, I'll have a calculator that'll make this a lot easier. Here we go. So we're assuming you're 65, and then we want to find the ages across the top are your hypothetical, your theoretical spouse's age. So we would find 65, and we'd line it up with the spouse that's 10 years younger. And there's your factor, 33.9. So you divide your 100,000 or your 500,000 or your million by 33.9, and that's how much you could take out. So it's not that hard to find on this table, but as I said, I will have hopefully you could see that over my screen, but I'll have a calculator for you soon. So that's the second strategy. And then the third strategy is to just use a chance of success number. So use some sort of tool, I'm going to show you 3, to calculate your chance of success and get to a spending point where your chance of success is at a level that's comfortable for you. I would say generally a chance of success somewhere between 70 and 90% is reasonable. I know that's a wide range. Some of it's going to depend on just your comfort level. Some of it's going to depend on your flexibility. Maybe you've got a lot of discretionary spending in your budget. You might not want to cut back, but you could if you had to. And part of it's going to be, in using these tools that I'll show you, how conservative or not your assumptions are. So if you put in there you think you're going to live to be 110, that's a really conservative assumption. You're not likely to live that long. On the other hand, if you think you're 65 and you put in you're going to live to 75, maybe there's reasons for that assumption, but I wouldn't call that a conservative assumption. So the more conservative my assumptions are, I think the more comfortable I would get with a somewhat lower chance of success. But again, ultimately, you're going to have to kind of come up with, I usually think of it in terms of a range, not a specific number, but I might say, okay, I want it somewhere between 80 and 85%, and I'd be comfortable with that as an example. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to show you 3 tools. So I'm going to start with the simplest of the tools, and this one, the first 2 are free. So this is just FiCalc. We've looked at this before. You can put in your portfolio balance. You can put in your stock bond allocation, including any investment fees you pay. That's really important. And then you can choose here a withdrawal strategy. Constant dollar would be that 4% rule kind of thinking. But the idea behind it is you're not actually using the 4% rule unless the withdrawal amount you put in here is exactly 4% of your portfolio balance, which is what it is at the moment, and we're adjusting for inflation. But you could put something else in, and the idea really is to put something else in until you get to a success rate that you're comfortable with. Now, this success rate is based on historical data. There's no simulation involved here. This is not using Monte Carlo simulations. So it's just using historical data. So let's say we put 50,000. That's 79%. You comfortable with that? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But you could dial this in. You could say, okay, well, what if I put in 48,500? That didn't change it much. So you got to play with it to come up with a number that you're comfortable with. 47,000. You can see how relatively small changes make a big difference. The other thing you do have to put is the duration of your retirement planning. You know, you think you're going to live 30 years. Obviously depends on your age and your view of your health and that sort of thing. And you can just sort of dial in a success rate. By the way, you can also put in extra withdrawals if you know you've got some kind of, you're going to buy a car or take a trip, and other income, right? So there's a little bit of variables that you can add to this. And of course, whatever you end up at here, you can look at the details and your ending portfolio value. Sometimes it's quite a lot, by the way, and sometimes it's not. If you retired in 1971, after 30 years, you're down to $8,700. And you can come down here and look at the specific years. You can show them. We can show them all. So again, this is very much based on historical data. This would be the simplest, fastest, quickest. It's free. But at the end of the day, you know, there's not a whole lot of detail you can put into this. So if we wanted to go up one level, what would we do? I would go to Empower. So Empower is also free. You can connect all of your accounts. This is a demo version. And you can connect all your investment accounts. It's actually, I think, great for tracking your investments. You can look at your asset allocation, your holdings. You can track your performance as compared to different benchmarks and so on. But for our purposes, if we go to planning, there's a retirement planner. And it's definitely a big step up over FiCalc. You can create multiple scenarios and compare them. And you can put in information. You know, this is your savings that gets drawn in from all of the accounts you connect, and you can see synced with linked accounts. If you're still saving for money or saving for retirement, how much you're saving, and so on. You can factor in Social Security, and you can add other income events, and you can see them here. Maybe you're going to work a little bit during retirement, or you're going to have an annuity, right? Or you expect some inheritance or a pension. So a lot more flexibility than FiCalc. And then you have your spending. You can, your sort of basic retirement spending you can set, but then, maybe you're going to take a vacation, what age you'll take it. And so you can add a lot of other spending goals. You can edit some assumptions like your tax rate, inflation rate, your life expectancy. So I think for a free tool, it's pretty robust. You can get a detailed sort of year-by-year breakdown of everything. So I think this is a great free tool. It's very easy to use. I like the graphical elements. Again, you can add scenarios and compare them. So for example, you could say, well, what if I work another couple of years? Or what if I retire a year or two early? Or what if I hold off on my Social Security and so I wait a couple of years, but I get a bigger balance, a bigger check. So, you can do all of those sorts of what if scenarios with Empower. So a great tool, and that's option 2. And you'll notice you do get a percent. So that's where we can dial in what percent we're comfortable with. Now, unlike FiCalc, this does use Monte Carlo simulations based on your investments and their average returns and their volatility. And so, you could say, well, I could comfortably bring that down a bit. I'd be okay. I don't need to be 94%. And so you could come in here and dial this in. You say, okay, well, what happens if I spend $4,500 a month? It took it down 2%. So you could dial that in either by changing this or creating other scenarios, right? So a great tool to use. And this might be your starting tool because, like I said, it's free and it really does quite a lot. If you said you wanted to really up your game, you want a really involved tool, let me log into it here. Where is it? I've lost it. Okay, it's Boldin. We've talked about it a lot on the show, but let me log into my account. This is actually again a demo account, and I'll show it to you. Here we go. So this is a demo account, and Boldin takes everything to another level. You can basically model just about anything that you can think of in Boldin and dial things in and have a lot more control if this is what you want. I'll just show you a few examples. You can list all of your accounts and then dial in what rate of return. You can use their suggested rates of return. You can customize it, optimistic, pessimistic rates of return. You can do the same thing or something similar with inflation. And you can have one rate for general inflation, a different one for medical bills, because they tend to go up a bit more than general inflation maybe. You can have a separate adjustment for cost of living COLAs, cost of living adjustments for Social Security. You might have a different one for housing. So you can see how you can really dial this in. You can factor in any debts you have, whether they're mortgages or non-mortgages. In expenses, they break out your recurring, you have one time, medical expenses before 65, and then you can factor in Medicare expenses and long-term care. So you can really dial this in. It does Roth conversion analysis. And in fact, you can look at insights and see, it does IRMA calculations if you're going to pay a little more for Medicare because of your modified adjusted gross income. You can look at lifetime cash flows, the tax tab here, great information about your tax brackets. This can be very useful when thinking about Roth conversion. So, we've talked a lot about Boldin on the show. I've done a lot of videos about it. So I'll leave it at that for this purposes, but you can end up doing something similar to what I showed you with Boldin, and you could look at your chance of success, right? So this one at the moment, again, this is a demo account, but it's at 77%. And so you could then start dialing in different changes. Now, because Boldin has so many features, yes, you can dial in the chance of success by changing your expenses, right? So maybe this is too low, so I could come into expenses and my monthly expense, I could say, I'm not comfortable with that. Instead of $6,400, I'll just put in $6,000 a month and save that. And it shows you some general information about how that affects your plan right here. And then you can go back to overview. I don't know that it changed. Oh yeah, it jumped it to 85%. But you can do other things as well, right? So I could think, well, maybe I'll goose my asset allocation a little bit. And as a result, come in here for, let's say I just did it for one account. And I could go in and say, okay, I'm going to change my asset allocation here. And so I'm going to change my assumed rate of return. It was a moderate 8.08, but I think 8.8 now, right? And you could see how that would affect your chance of success. You could do the same thing with when you're going to claim Social Security. I mean, really, the kinds of ways you can dial in different assumptions, pretty much limited only by our imaginations. And of course, you can create scenarios. What you have up here are pessimistic scenario is one example. You could use baseline. These are scenarios I've created. and you can create, I think it's up to 10 scenarios. I think it might be limited to 10, but certainly I think more than enough. They have a scenario manager. This is where you would create it. Again, I've covered this in other past videos. But you can really, for those that really want to dial in their retirement, I think this is probably, you might get to this point as you get close to retirement or move into retirement, and you really need to dial these things in. It might be worth the time. The cost isn't, for me in any event, I think it's a little over $100 a year. The cost isn't the issue for a lot of people. I mean, it's still money's money. The real thing is going to be the time commitment, because it does take some time to learn. And but if you're willing to put that time in, if it's worth it to you, you can really model just about anything you want in retirement. So there you go. I know I've thrown a lot at you, but we think about the safe withdrawal rate. Does 4% still work? Is it 5% now? Is it going to work in the future? And those are all good questions to ask, but there are plenty of good ways to look at retirement spending that don't require us to actually come up with a safe withdrawal rate. And today I've given you 3. So as I said, I'll link to everything below the video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to help you out any way I can. And until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.